From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Beecher Wiggins, Director for Acquisitions and Bibliographic Access here at the library, and it's again a pleasure to start off, and actually this is our first session for the year of LC's Digital Future in You that is coordinated by Angela Kinney and Judith Cannon, two of the chiefs in ABA who have been doing this for a little while now. And we try to find interesting topics and presenters to come and help keep you informed in some of the latest that's going on related to automation applications and automated techniques. This morning I'm particularly pleased because we are focusing on BIBFRAME, the model that the Library of Congress has been developing under the auspices of Network Development and Mark Standards Office. Sally McCallum and her capable staff have been developing what we're expecting to be the replacement for the MARC format. I have been working with our presenters this morning, Tiziana Possemato and Michele Casalini, for a while now. We have been involved with Casalini as one of our leading acquisitions vendors, and in the past few years with their exploration and working with BIBFRAME as a model and helping us to prove that BIBFRAME can be expanded and is scalable. Their involvement with BIBFRAME has been related to their development of the shared virtual discovery environment in linked data, what they are dubbing SHARE-VDE, and they will be talking about that this morning. And SHARE-VDE is a community-driven research and development project with a chief goal of bringing BIBFRAME into practice that libraries, librarians, and the library and library patrons can put to good use. So they'll give us some sense of what they've been doing with this, and the Library of Congress has been one of the institutions that has been working with them on the SHARE-VDE approach. Tiziana is the Chief Information Officer of Casalini, and she's also the Director of @Cult. She holds a degree in philosophy from La Sapienza in Rome and diplomas in archival science and library science from the University of from the Vatican Library Schools, and then also a master's degree in library science from the University of Florence. She's has led numerous projects during her career, both for library automation, for analysis, mapping, and conversion, and for the transformation of linked open data into a publication format for numerous institutions. Michele Casalini is the Managing Director of Casalini, and which produces authority data and bibliographic data in addition to supplying books and journals for the customer base of Casalini. Following studies at in modern languages and literature at the University of Florence and a period of working in publishing company in La Nuova Italia, Michele specialized in the field of information and technology management. Michele is also a board member of the Council on Library and Information Resources. So we have very well-informed presenters this morning, and I look forward to hearing what they have to say, even though I am familiar with some of it, and I am more especially want you as LC staff to hear what's been going on. So, Tiziana and Michele, and I'll let you decide who goes first, or maybe you play off each other.
Thank you very much, Picha, and thank you all for being here. For Tiziana and me, it's a great privilege to be here today and to have the opportunity to talk to you about the SHARE Virtual Discovery Environment project. As you know, Casalini Libri is one of the main suppliers of European publications, cataloging, and technical services to academic libraries across the world. We have been working with the Library of Congress for decades, are a member of PCC, the Program for Cooperative Cataloging, participating in NACO and SACO, and our original cataloging division has received valuable input from the library during the implementation of RDA, which began on day 1, March 31st, 2013. After the first year of RDA, we began to collect input from the library community on the application and use of the emerging BIBFRAME data model. The input received from the wider library community, and in particular the Library of Congress, made it clear that we would in the future be expected to supply data not only in MARC format, but also according to the new framework. In response, we embarked on a strategy for the progressive implementation of BIBFRAME in close collaboration with ETCALT, our long-standing technological partner with extensive experience in technological solutions for cultural heritage institutions. ETCALT has also been technological partner of Aliada, automatic publication and a linked data paradigm of library data, a European community-funded project. Following a series of initial studies and a feasibility analysis in January 2016, we presented the first results and a plan for action at the Library of Congress BIBFRAME Update Forum at Midwinter, LA in Boston. Considering that this revolution has an effect on many aspects of the traditional library catalog, for example, the format, organization, and retrieval of data, the objectives, standards, and interpretations will be in continuous transformation for quite some time. Each organization will have its own specific workflow. We were very pleased in summer 2016 to receive the approval and support of 12 North American institutions for the SHARE-VDE project. We are particularly grateful to our contacts and colleagues at Stanford University Libraries for their valuable trust and encouragement. We feel a great responsibility and ever-growing enthusiasm for this research and development initiative, which aims to make real steps toward the effective use of BIBFRAME. Seeing not only the practical result, but also the incredible potential of linked data for providing discoverability has been extremely satisfying. Indeed, using linked data in libraries, catalogs can provide a number of advantages. It gives visibility to information and resources that would otherwise be hidden. It helps to connect and improve interoperability among library, archives, and museum domains. It is a basis for new cooperative initiatives in the sector, and it improves accessibility for library patrons and the wider public with the ultimate benefit of safeguarding cultural heritage. Of course, some problems have emerged during our work on the project, and we will see some of these during the presentation. The work is, since the beginning, based on the requirements and expectations of the library community, and this will be the driving force for the definition of the activities and priorities to be put into production, the phase 3, modularizing and parameterizing individual components as necessary. I hope there will be enough time later for questions and for a discussion. With that in mind, let's now look into details at the results of phase 1 and 2. I will cover only the first part of the presentation. The majority will be handled by Tiziana Possemato, that is the director of the project. this is a brief index of the topics that we will cover this morning. I'm sorry. You already know who we are, and we are based in Florence and Rome. And a little bit, I mean, the background of our company that I mentioned before. What were the starting point of the design of the project? First of all, the enrichment of MARC records with URIs in order to simplify and make the BIBFRAME conversion possible and more effective, of course. The use of a framework to automate the conversion from MARC into RDF using BIBFRAME vocabulary. And the creation of a BIBFRAME layered platform prototype starting from bibliographic and authority records to test and demonstrate the advantages that the BIBFRAME data model is bringing. And this has been also for us at the beginning a surprising element because we understood that it is necessary in order to discuss and to share future plans with the community, really to touch concretely the potential advantages of the new data model can bring. The main goals of phase 1 and 2 of the research and development project has been reconciliation and clusterization of variant forms of the same entity, a key element of the starting point for several further activities. The enrichment of MARC records with URIs with the development of detection procedures for entity identification, including related terms. The conversion, supply, and management of authority and bibliographical data in BIBFRAME, taking into account the complexity of the long and heterogeneous transition time on both the library and the data producer sides. And the publication, as I mentioned, of a BIBFRAME 3 layered platform prototype. Phase 1, in particular, has seen the contribution of the participating libraries with their data sets, with their record of 2 imprint years, 1985 and 2015. The reason to have these 2 different imprint years were to have records that were based under different rules. RDA records in 2015 and, of course, pre-RDA records for 1985. A total of approximately 2 million bibliographical records and 3 million authority records were processed, converted at that time in BIBFRAME 1, and then released on the SHARE-VDE portal. This phase ended 1 year ago. Phase 2 of the project has foreseen that each of the participant libraries sent us their entire catalog. So we handled approximately 100 million bibliographical and authority records. A relationship database that registers the relationships between entities, person, works, instances, subjects, publishers, is established in order to assure a more precise identification rate for each entity in order to reach a higher quality of results without human intervention. And of course, we have worked on refinement of data, for example, for co-authors or editors, where there is a variety of ways in which they are identified in library records. And phase 2 handled the export of data in RDF format, filtering the library preferred URIs, of course, in BIBFRAME 2. We included URIs sources from a number of projects. We analyzed, we made an analysis for the creation of the relationships between subject terms and strings in different languages, and we worked on the provenance declaration, update management, and built-in instances that are also quite key elements and prerequisites for then a production scene. So we ended now phase 2, and we are now discussing with the library community about priorities and use cases for a modular implementation in production of the various components for phase 3 that will, of course, vary from institution to institutions because the workflows are different, the habits are different, and so there is absolutely not one schema that works, one working schema that works for all. This is a list of the participant libraries in phase 1 and or phase 2 of the project. So I ask now Tiziana to move on with a very brief overview of the theoretical context.
Thank you. The theoretical context will be briefly, of course, because you know all this environment where we are. And we started from Mark 21, and we analyzes the effect of conversion using SHARE-VDE records, and of course we try to have in mind also the international cataloging principles and the BIBFRAME model. And of course, to arrive to a conversion in semantic web linked data using specifically, but not only BIBFRAME. So our focus is on BIBFRAME, but of course, each library can choose to add additional ontologies to complete the BIBFRAME used as core, as a heart of the project. Why we focus on SHARE-VDE, linked open data in BIBFRAME? Because if you think these guidelines, format, model are all related to exactly the same model, that is an entity relationship model. So have in mind, in any case, the entities and their relationship between them. So also this type of cultural environment has something in common. And so I can try to share with you the process overview of SHARE-VDE. In this picture is summarized some of important steps of the project, starting from the left, where we indicated different type and different format of data, of records, not only Mark 21, but other family of Mark or other formats, not specifically Mark. The records are worked, are handled, and using two different processes. The main process is, of course, a similarity score process that is a lot of algorithms to identify similarity in heading, for example, and to find similarity in records and so on. And the Autify. The Autify is important because it's a toolless process that make use of external sources such as Library of Congress subject heading, VIAF, ISNI, Library of Congress authority file, and so on, to enrich information and to simplify the clusterization process. So both processes, the similarity score and Autify, produce an entity detection to identify specifically each entity that is present in a description, the enrichment of information with the URIs, but also with additional attributes in different format, and the reconciliation clusterization process. That is really the key concept of we we hope, of course, of our project. So starting from this output, we produce a database of relationship, because as you know, mark record are full of relationship, not clearly expressed, but each record presents a full of relationships between entities. So we reported and we are creating a database of relationship, a knowledge base of cluster, because the clusterization, the reconciliation process produce a lot of relationship between, for example, variant form to identify a name, a person, and go through the Lodify, that is the conversion tool. We release record data in RDF to be published autonomously by library or to be published in the SHARE-VDE portal. So some focus on some processes. We start usually from authority records. In fact, as Michele told, we receive authority record not from all libraries, but from libraries who manage this type of record. And we manage authority records using this similarity score and Authify tools and process. We use a Postgres database as a bridge to relate and to save and store some information that we need, for example, all the variant form of a heading of a person, and we produce the cluster knowledge base in RDF, so in linked open data. The second step is manage the bibliographic record. So the bibliographic record use again the similarity score and the Authify tools, and are enriched the Postgres database, and finally will produce mark enriched record. So mark enriched with the URIs coming from different sources. And the process two, we start from the cluster knowledge base to convert record using Lodify and to store in a triple store. We mention here BlazeGraph, that is an open source triple store, even if we are considering other solution more powerful than BlazeGraph. But in any case, the important is the concept of a triple store. And the second one, we publish the cluster knowledge base. We produce the published knowledge base. And as second one, the bibliographic record that pass through the similar process in Lodify, in the triple store, and we produce the each data set for each library related to the cluster knowledge base. I will try to explain after this sense, the sense of this relation. And we produce also the mark enriched in a binary format or other format. So just to give you a very brief idea of our technology, as you can see, the cluster knowledge base is the heart of the project, because we think that is the power of the project to have the entity reconciliated and perfectly identified. And we now are working in a new function to create a new cluster starting from the already existent. But we will explain this at the end of presentation. And just a brief look to our technology, we try to put together different types of technology, because what the triple store can do well is something, but not so well as a relational database, or not so well as an inverted index such as Solar. So we try to put together all these type of technologies to use the best of each of them and to put together. So I try to explain you the entity identification, reconciliation, and data enrichment processes. So, of course, I will jump these slides, but someone of you probably never have seen. But our first question is how to identify an entity, starting from a standard record or a standard description. And the identification question problem is something that is for all people in the world, and for all type of information. So in this case, in this picture, you can see different version, different picture of the same people, Albert Camus, of the same person, Albert Camus, and each of these representation is a valid representation of him. It's not something that is more real than another. All representations are valid, represent the same person, Albert Camus. So in our process, we try to identify Albert Camus as a person, as a real world object in the world, as a real person, and to give him an identification, a unique identification, but using in the same type the unique identification that each project in the world assigned to the same person to put together information for the exactly and uniquely person that is Albert Camus. But as I told you, the importance of identification is not only in the cataloging tradition, is something that is related to all people and in all world. For example, these are two pictures taken at the City Lights bookstore in San Francisco, where a door is expressly indicated with a note, I am a door, or corporations are not people. So something, the exigence to identify perfectly the entities is something that is related to all the world. So with the online presence of different catalogs and authority files that are available in the various formats, in various following various guidelines and in open mode, also the concept of authority control or of union catalog evolved into the grouping of an entity's identifying attributes from different sources. And this process is best known as reconciliation and consists in creating a cluster, a group of data that all refer to the same entity. And so we start exactly from the records, that is our tradition in cataloging. We start from a record to arrive to identify each entity that is present in a record. And for example, just to give you some brief ideas about this, we can derive an agent from a record. We can derive when we are we can, of course, a work from a mark record, a subject, a publisher, the attributes to identify an instance, and so on. So we try to identify each entity that is defined and recorded in a record. But as you know, for each of these entities, we can have a different expression, different description in different languages, following different rules. So we need put together this variant form, considered them as different attributes of the same entity. And for this, we thought about a share project to put together information coming from different sources and to perfectly identify entities and put them in relationship. So bring together and make available data from different sources in a way that we can consider a democratic way, so that doesn't exist one form that is the best for the world, but each culture, each person think that is the best for himself. And so we try to identify the entity in question. And this is the base of our SHARE-VDE project. So starting from traditional record in before and after RDA, and we notice, of course, some important differences in converting data before and after RDA, but we need to convert all data that we have. So we finally try to be able to identify, for example, a work with its relationship. So a work related to subject that are managed in a work with creation creator, with the publications, and so on. Or we define, for example, a subject. Thomas Mann, in this case, as a subject of something, or all books that speak about Thomas Mann. Or we hope we will be able to define and to find the publisher and all its relationship. For example, Giulia Einaudi Editori in relation with the places, with the other forms that are related to the same publisher, the person, the people who published with this publisher, the subject, and so on. Or this is an example of clusterization, for example, an example of a collaboration and sharing. So this is the result for Antonio Vivaldi of all forms coming from the authority, local authority file, all forms coming from VIAF as project, all forms coming from cross-reference taken from authority record, all probably also the form that are used in bibliographic record and that doesn't match with authority. Because we can imagine that all these forms are used by someone to search an entity and to find an entity. And so this is an example of work instances reconciliation. This is a work of Vivaldi, Cimento dell'armonia e dell'invenzione, and all possible instances. So a different title to identify an instance related to the same work, to the same intellectual production of a person. Or, for example, the instance, different instances present in different libraries. So the same instance that is present in different libraries and put together in one group so that the end user can simply define and find the information and choose what he needs. So how reconciliation and enrichment can work? We work using usually two different processes. One is an automated process, and the second one is a manual process, because as you know, Casalini produced record for different libraries, so has the opportunity to work on record during the production. Of course, taking in consideration that automated process produce a high level of reconciliation and clusterization, but a low level of results validation, because are automated processes. And contrary, manual processes produce a low level of reconciliation and clustering and a high level of results validation. So we think that put together will produce the best result. And this is again the same picture than before to identify the automated reconciliation and enrichment process, using in this case Antonio Vivaldi as an entity and reaching this entity with all forms coming from different projects and so on. And for this process, the heart of the process is Autify. I try to explain you briefly what is Autify, a general description. Autify is a RESTful module that offers several search and detection services. The project started at the very beginning for overcoming some limitation in using the public BIAF web API. We started the project using the API available in BIAF. But of course, BIAF, being a public project, doesn't allow a massive invocation of its API, while we need manage more than 100 million of record for this type of project. So we found that this type of use of web API was not efficient. And so we try to find a different way. So we try to use the dump of BIAF and to implement a local powered search engine to to use this source. And of course, this was just the first model, but in the time we added a lot of different sources in the same tool. So, Autifile offers a list of different services. The class search services, for example. The Autifile class services provides a full text search service among names and work clusters. The Search Web API uses behind the scenes an invisible queries approach in order to try to, of course, find a match as much precise as possible within the managed clusters. The invisible queries approach allows to make everything transparent to the caller. So, on top of a single search request, the system executes a chain of different search strategies with different priority, and the first match that produces a result will populate the response that will be returned. For debugging purposes, the response will also include the matching strategies that produce the results so that technician can check and can use and can improve the search method. The system has been built with extensibility in mind to manage different sources in different formats and adding new services. So the mentioned chain is fully configurable by the project manager. For instance, here's a brief description of the current configuration when searching name cluster. For example, we can search in subfield matching, so we can define what kind of subfield of each tag we can use in searching. Or we can input heading exact match before the first searching is, okay, try to find something that exactly match with my heading. Or we pass to a full text search. If exact match is not possible, then a regular full text search is executed with things like a proximity search for names and for other entities. As a last chance, the system executes a search by initials in order to find a valid match in those cases when the input string or the indexed heading contains the name in its short forms. In USA, you use usually the initial to identify person, and so in this case we try to find and to identify the person also using the initial of name. And so this is a type of responses where the system finds that Meyer Bertrand is exactly the same entity that Bertrand Meyer or Meyer Bertrand with and without dates. But another service is important in Autifile is the relator term detection. Starting from a mark record, the system produces an analysis of tags that contain a name, and for each of them tries to figure out, using the statement of responsibility of the input record, but using in addition, for example, field for notes such as the content notes and so on, and what is the corresponding role within the worker represented by the given record. For instance, on top of the following input, you can see here a declaration of responsibility with 2 authors, 2 creators, and prefazione all'edizione italiana di G. Biorci, and the 3 heading reported in this record. So in this case, the relator term detection was able to identify 2 co-authors for the same work, and someone as having an additional role, not as co-authors. And in this case, we use the other that is an unclassified role when we are not able to perfectly identify the role, what kind of role, but declaring, okay, another role, not the co-author, is the first step to identify. And this is another example of detection, entity detection, with analyzing this statement from Chaucer to the present, John Stephens and Ruth Waterhouse, and having these fields without a subfield E or a subfield 4. And in this case, the Autify detect response identify it as an author and as as an author, yes. And this is another example, edited and introduced by, and in this case, this is the response, and in this case, the tool identify perfectly that Elena Jaiusi is an editor in this case. Of course, we usually can find also critical case. See, in this case, edizione anastatica introduzione appendice a cura di, con la collaborazione di. So, very many roles, roles for the same person, and so in this case we prefer now to define, okay, other. So this makes possible to a person to check the record using this response and to correct or to input. Of course, we are trying to improve the knowledge base with all expressions present in responsibility coming from different languages, so to have a more and more increased knowledge base. But of course, we need to do some step again to arrive to something of perfect or perfectly working. So I show you a brief name class and process. Simply name class and process. In this case, we have form coming from an authority record, from José de Lucio, and different forms coming from different bibliographic record. And the similarity score and Autify identify this variant form as the form related to the same person, assigns also a weight that is an important measuring term to accept or non accept the cluster. So, in the massive cluster processes, we try to give you the main processes, that is the authority headings analysis and process in Postgres, the first step, the data enrichment with external sources, very important, that we can use an international project already available to identify the entity, the MARC bibliographic process, the entity detection process, the name heading to authority name association, but because it's not so useful, also used, also general used, use the authority authorized form also in bibliographic record. Not all libraries have an authority system, and the name heading to variant name association and the cluster check. It exists, add. It doesn't exist, create a new cluster. But we have also a manual process, and we try to follow the PCC directives because PCC identifies and addresses policy issues on the use of identifier in marks. And many items are now in discussion into the PCC group. For example, developing guidelines to include identifiers in mark bibliographic and authority records, the use of multiple identifier for the same entity, how use a multiple identifier, determining the entities for which identifier should be provided in an initial implementation, and identifying automated methods for populating and maintaining new and existing records with identifier. But also in this case, the importance of identification and detection in the semantic web to enrich a mark record with the URI, Casalini Libri uses the URI management system that is included into the cataloging module of VolueSuite, that is the cataloging module developed by AtCalt and in use in Casalini. This also simplifies the reconciliation of variant forms of the same entity with the development of detection procedures for entity identification and the conversion to BIBFRAME. So the URI management system allows the management of multiple identifiers for each access point or heading. The use of external sources with API and web services, or using, in some cases, the dump of data, and associate heading with the URIs that identify it in each of the projects. But this is just an example of the URI management system in VolueSuite, where the cataloguer can choose for each heading, define a URI system, and can add, check, modify, or delete a URI coming from different sources, or can choose, can search in different sources, and search and check the preferred URI for this heading. But why multiple identifiers associated with the same heading or access point? First of all, because Casalini produces records for many libraries, and each libraries define a preferred form of URI, preferred source, or a different order in having different URI. So Casalini, starting from the same record, has to produce different records as final output for different libraries. So in this case, we realize the system that made possible to assign URI not in original in the mark record, but in a different table with different system. And so for each library, Casalini can choose how many URIs to make available for each heading, how to associate them with the heading, how to show them in relation to data use and formats, following, of course, the preferences declared by each library. And so the cataloging system is related and linked to the Adempiere system, that is an ERP that uses Casalini to manage orders, invoices, and the profile, customer profile. The most important section is the customer profile. So this is, for example, the customer profile for Harvard College Library with a mapping URI, and each library can define a mapping. For each tag can define, okay, what is the preferred URI if it exists. In this case, for example, one is for Italian, okay, one is for ISNI, 2 is for VIAF, 3 is for Library of Congress NAF. So if is an ISNI, please put the ISNI URI. If it doesn't exist, please put a VIAF and so on. And each library can define a different mapping so that we can produce, starting from exactly the same record in the local database, 2 different records with different URI for each library. And of course, each library can define how to receive this data. For example, as enrichment in tag 100, choosing the subfield. Or for example, as enrichment in authority file, choose the perfect and the correct tag and so on. But of course, when we work with URI, with identifiers, we need also think about manage them. Because when we publish our data enriched with URI, we are thinking that other people, other projects make use of our data. So we need to provide something that make possible the use of this data in the future. And so we thought about a URI registry, that is the history of each URI when something change in it. And for example, when we reorganized the cluster, because we discovered discover something that is not correct. For example, we put together two people in the same cluster. We discover that is not the same people, are two different people. So we need to split the cluster and assign a new URI for the second person. So the URI registry reports all this changing. For example, the resource added to cluster, but also modified or removed from it, the date of the update, the particular operation performed, and the status of a URI, for example, is valid or it is not still valid, or the URI alias. This is, okay, use this URI for this entity, and so on. So finally, we can start the conversion in RDF and, in this case, in BIBFRAME. I don't give you the details of Lodifile, but just to explain that Lodifile is the evolution of Aliada, coming from a European project that is a conversion tool. Aliada is transparent. It can manage as Lodifile different ontologies, but Lodifile was the evolution that we produce to manage BIBFRAME. So the importance of Lodifile, I give you just a particular, that is the possibility to work with atomic pieces, atomic processors. This makes possible to work with small part of the overall task. And this means that you can change and define for each specific piece a specific class of property of an ontology or to change and so on. So this makes the tools very elastic and very powerful and easy to manage. This is a conversion template because Lodifile converts each incoming records by means of conversion templates, and each template associates a mark record belonging to the incoming data stream with a set of rules associated with one or more ontologies to produce the final assertion. And finally, the trust and provenance, because when you publish your data or when you put together data coming from different sources, we need to think about the provenance of your data, the quality. You need to assure the quality of your data, and you need guarantee the accuracy of this information. So we use the concept of provenance, that is the origin, the authorship of an information, to extend and to give trust about an information. So creating a link between information and this source has become essential for the purpose of guaranteeing the authority of the information itself. And so the triple became a quadruple because we add the term of source to declare that, okay, it's not something that is universal valid, but someone says that this is blue, this is this color, this is the name, and so on. Now we go in the SHARE-VDE phase 2 deliverable that, as Michele told you, was finalized and finished more or less in December of the last year. We have to release something else, but we are more ready. And so we have 4 different deliverables. The deliverable one is the dataset in BIBFRAME 2.0 of the entire catalog of each institution, which with the triples or tuples derived directly from the mark records, delivered both as triple and as quadruples with the addition of the provenance and with the SHARE-VDE URIs. This first deliverable is strictly related to deliverable 2 2, that is the knowledge base of cluster accessible in RDF. And we think that is the added value of the project, because each library can receive their own data, but all related to the same knowledge base, to demonstrate also the power of sharing data and of a cooperating project. The delivery 3 is more autonomous, is independent by the knowledge base, is auto-consistent. And in the deliverable 3, you will have the URIs from external sources, so not the SHARE-VDE URI, but the international URIs. So each library can use deliverable 3 to publish their own data autonomously respect to other libraries. And deliverable 4 is the Mark 21 records for each institution enriched with URIs. So this is a resume of this deliverable to demonstrate that deliverable 1 and 2 are strictly related to, and the deliverable 3 and 4 are autonomous, and each library can use autonomously. Where we have now with BIBFRAME. BIBFRAME is for us, we are a sort of pioneer project. So each day we receive news, new information, upgrade. So it's not so easy to follow the project, but is a very, very, very interesting, passionate phase of our project. Now we are managing the extension of Library of Congress to perfectly manage Mark 21 tags. And we underline the class that we already managed in our state of the art. But we will continue, of course, each day to include additional classes and so on. So this is an example, deliverable 1, the RDF conversion, and see here the use of LC vocabulary extensions to manage some specific information. This is the continuous of the record. And the deliverable 2, the knowledge base of cluster. I give you just an idea about a clusterization process for 4-name heading type. See here an example, bridged, Sweden, saint, with a date. And so this is an example of the algorithm to identify a person. So the selection of interesting subfield, we start from the full tags, and after we go back to find each piece of information. The first step is the normalization of string text without diacritics, accents, and so on. So these fields become these fields. They translate all in uppercase and search string into the bivariance form and cross-references. So the fields become something like this. And if no cluster found, because we use this heading to match the string, if no cluster found, subfields will be analyzed for comparing, for example, subfield A with other existing form, or comparing only the numeric part of subfield D having the same subfield A, or comparing subfield C for saint or santa or other forms in other languages, and so on, to arrive finally to identify the entity. And this produces the knowledge base, and we use, as I told you before, Postgres as a bridge. We don't publish Postgres database. We will publish the cluster knowledge base in RDF, but we use a local database in Postgres because in some cases the relational database is able to do something that the RDF triple store is not able to do. So this is the final result of all form that we found in in libraries for this entity, and we reported this in Postgres. And finally, the results. We published all this form in a portal because the goal for this project is help not only library in using BIBFRAME, new technology, but in helping, of course, end user in use this information to improve the search engine experience and to use of data. So this is another component to produce a deliverable, and is a table for external sources, a sort of map of all external sources that we use to improve the record with the URIs. And of course, each library can select and choose the preferred sources. And so we arrive to the enriched Mark 21. This is the original record, and with the record enriched with the URI. Of course, we have also in this step a lot of doubts that we try to solve with the availability of Sally McCallum and this group who help us in understanding what is hard to understand. And also for Mark 21, for example, we have some doubts. If you use subfield 0, subfield 1 to enrich the record, what kind of source is the best to use in what cases. So it's interesting as project because it gives us the opportunity to share our doubts with very expert people, skilled people, and to improve our knowledge about this. So I asked to Michele to introduce the last 3 slides, that is the possible steps for the future.
We started last summer at ALA during a workshop for SHARE-VDE to discuss preliminary what a production phase could be. And it came immediately out that the scene is very heterogeneous because the priorities are also different from institution to institution. And there are, of course, different workflows to cover. There are aspects in both directions, in the sense from traditional records into linked data, but then there are also, and this will be more frequent in the coming future, data created with a BIBFRAME editor originally that needs sometimes to be retroconverted because the operational systems in libraries still need and will need for a foreseeable long period of time a MARC record to place orders, to handle a number of services. So we started to work on, let's say, a list of candidate use cases. And we had a very important meeting here on October the 6th at the Library of Congress. We were very grateful that this meeting could be hosted here, where we analyzed mostly the original and copy cataloging use cases. We will have our next meeting will be in Denver. And the next coming couple of slides give some details about the original and copy cataloging. Maybe we need also a new name for copy cataloging definition in the future. So far, the candidate use cases for a production phase foresee, on one side, the publication of the entire data sets on a portal that should be no longer a prototype, of course, with the batch or automated data flows in order to allow libraries to send daily the new data they created in MARC or with BIBFRAME and with the BIBFRAME editor, and of course to receive back the data reconciled, enriched, and with their preferences. At the same time, let's say, considering this as the basis for a production phase, there are a number of further steps and further use cases that you see here listed as candidate phase 3B. Before we move on with some further details about two of these use cases, I would like to join Tiziana's words that expressed deep gratitude to Sally McCallum and her colleagues of the Standard Office, because without many answers that we received, I mean, what we have done would not have been really possible. But let's go here in some details, Tiziana, explaining this and the next slide, please.
This is, of course, something that we are studying with the group, so I cannot enter in details because we need defined details, but the general idea is to make the SHARE-VDE project something more than a publication layer, more than a publication portal, but to make possible that the richness of the project can become a richness for libraries in using, for example, the cluster knowledge base during the cataloging process and so on. So the first use cases try to analyze the flow, a possible flow that have the SHARE-VDE project in the center, and the possibility to use this important, powerful knowledge base of data to copy cataloging or to define, declare, and holding. Okay, I have a copy of this book and I can report this using the SHARE-VDE portal and the SHARE-VDE process. So we are thinking to a large contribution by libraries to have something that is useful in cataloging process, and above all, that make use of this richness, and exactly the same but with different flows, of course, for the original cataloging, because this make possible the use of different tools. For example, the tools that the Library of Congress propose for creating or for editing data, also because we are trying to think to a new environment where libraries not only will publish data in RDF, but will produce directly and originally data in RDF. So a new environment that will use all these tools that come from our project, but also from other projects, above all Library of Congress project, to put together and to give to libraries this new instrument to produce and to manage data in RDF. Of course, in this case, we need to think to another scenario where the conversion will be from RDF to MARC, for example, because a lot of library will continue to use MARC 25, MARC 21 as cataloging format, as format to exchange data. So the attention change, and now we are thinking to the immersion of this process, starting from RDF and ending with MARC 21. But I hope to have someone of you interested in these use cases and to contribute in developing these use cases that now we are studying with all libraries that are part of this project. So I I jumped the conclusion because I think that you already can imagine the conclusion, how important is to sharing and to reuse information resources, how it could be important not only for librarians but also for end users to have an enriched information, a linked information, to have the possibility to receive also information from online dictionaries, on online encyclopedias that usually they use, and to have a common knowledge base, a common shared information with all the world. So thank you for attention, and if you have questions, we are available.
Well, you've heard a lot. What questions do you have? Aaron.
Would there be a way that we could get data from somebody who doesn't plan on sharing with us? I'll give an example. I do Italian law. Many of the authors are magistrates. I discovered that if I put the name, the word magistrato, and then either nato or nata, for born, I almost always get the Ministry of Justice appointment list when the person was appointed or promoted, which gives their birth date and place of birth, which is very useful since it seems many authors in the world like to have the same name as other authors. But of course the Ministry of Justice is not producing this list to help catalogers. Or another example, well, Italy for example, I often discover there's a union list of Italian law libraries that has cataloging, full cataloging, for records that the Casalini record, that LC or OCLC, isn't just like a core acquisitions record, but there are beautiful records by law libraries, but they're not any way to get the data other than cutting and pasting. Is there a way somehow with this we could get data without people having produced it for us?
Thank you, because this is absolutely a very interesting domain. I mean, that needs progressively to be covered. I mean, and there, I mean, I guess, and certainly Tiziana can help me in replying. This can be done through various in various ways, using as source. I mean, various data sources. I make an example that is not completely, I mean, overlapping with what you were saying, but just to tell you, I mean, that there is the intention to address this kind of topics. In Italian, there is an agency, a national agency for the evaluation of the research output, ANVUR. And they have, and we were involved in it, set up a working group to study the possibility to make, let's say, better use of the information, and to have a database that can then be shared with the community in a more efficient way. There are also some attempts to make use of the database, of ORCID database, I mean, where a lot of Italian researchers are now obliged to be registered. So about you mentioned, it is certainly, I mean, we have to double check and put it on our list that Minister of Justice, I mean, of course, in the extent that they can publish and are willing to make available their data, that this data is then included for having a more precise identification.
And probably interesting is also the role of publishers. Because publishers usually are the first people who met the author, and usually they can have a lot of information that the librarian cannot have. So also in this case, and in Italy, there is an initiative to involve the organization of all publishers in be more strongly included in this type of project, because they are really the corporate body and the entity that can have some information to identify and to disambiguate the person, all type of people.
A question?
When will you release the data set information to the various libraries, participating libraries?
The phase 2?
Yes.
Okay, we started to release in October, and we are progressively releasing to all libraries. We left the Library of Congress as last because it's, of course, a bit more complicated, and because we prefer to be sure before, but we are working in defining the last requirements coming from extensions, and we started sending a very, very small file to the group, the BIBFRAME group, so to check the quality, and so we think that within 1 month we will end this process. But of course, this is important. The phase 2, the release of this deliverable, is something that progressively will continue, because we discover each day new requirements coming from BIBFRAME, but also from PCC, URI group. For example, we are waiting to have the final requirement to manage work in subfield 705.8, because we know that some is under discussion, and we are taking part in this discussion. But when finally a decision will be taken, we need build again the Market 21 with the new requirements and give to libraries. So I think that the library understand that is a delicate phase of transition, and that each day happens something so that we can improve the process.
Needless to say, I am encouraged that BIBFRAME is workable and a viable model based on what you have shared. I guess one of the questions that comes out is you're working with a discrete group of librarians. So how do you foresee this being shared more broadly? Is it all going to rely on each of the individual member libraries receiving its data and then sharing that data through a publishing mechanism and making it available for searching, as opposed to a single source that is someplace that any interested library or cultural institution can link into as part of the linked data environment? Obviously, I want this shared, but I also realize that you are an entity that has to worry about all that you put into it. What can you say about that? And I know you will be meeting with colleagues in Denver on Friday, which I won't be attending for probably the first time in 25 years, but what are your thoughts on that?
Thank you for the question, because it's of course a very crucial one. First of all, the data is all your data. So you can use it, and locally you can use it in a shared repository. I mean, it's totally up to you. As the future of this initiative that is ready now in the very short future to come out from the research and development phase and to go into production. But what this production scenario will be, it really is up to you, in the sense that we intentionally don't have a product to propose. I mean, it must, otherwise it would not make sense from our perspective. It must be really designed and based on your expectations, your priorities. So what another aspect to say is, to mention, is that everything is totally independent from the library local system. So what our feeling so far is that, and this was one of the goals, of course, of phase 1 and 2 of SHARE-VDE, is to prove that a certain number of tools or start to be mature, to be put into production. And this then can be used in ways that really your community will shape together to do certain things. A consensus of a certain number of institutions is needed, because otherwise it can make little sense. There are therefore aspects related to the availability, as Tiziana mentioned, in RDF, of the knowledge base, in order to have a unique identifier among the community. There are aspects related to the production or conversion of data after all the reconciliation processes and enrichment into linked open data. Yeah, so let's say it's really, we hope now that there are enough ingredients on the table to play and to allow you to express your vision of what meets best your needs, and this is the intention of the coming meeting on Friday, and of course the discussion will continue. From the side of Casalini Library and our original cataloging department, we are now almost ready to start supplying marker record enriched with URIs, or to supply to libraries the equivalent BIBFRAME data sets. And this is, of course, as original cataloging agency, one of our responsibilities. And as we cover, I mean original cataloging for the Romance language countries. But so I'm sorry, Bicha, if my answer was not a complete answer.
Your answer is about as good as I would expect you to be able to give us on the spot. But I wanted to hear you articulate that and to see if there was any reaction to that. Other comments or questions? Mel?
Yes, I actually kind of had a question that piggybacks off of what you had asked, because one of the benefits of the system we have now is that we can benefit from each other's cataloging. Just as an example, within an authority record, I may create the record at a base level of information, but the next cataloger who works with that person's name may have more information that can be added to it, and everybody benefits from that. I was wondering, I wasn't sure where this would take place in your system, because it is quite complex. Is there any way that is, as other catalogers or institutions might work with the data that you provide, that any changes they might make could feed back into your system and then be redistributed in the same way? And not just other catalogers, but also perhaps other users, patrons, who might be able to say, I'm looking at this book because I'm reading it. Oh, I could actually look at that catalog record and say more specifically, yes, this person was the writer of the preface.
The feedback, I answer certainly very superficially, so please, I beg your pardon. The feedback of a more precise information that is already available, or, of course, the addition of certain data elements that are added with all the provenance declaration, of course, are absolutely part of these two drafts of data flow. I mean, that foresee a cooperation among the institutions. So there are institutions that foresee certainly to keep data locally, but that can take advantage of this, I mean, cloud data sets and knowledge base. There are other libraries that foresee to rely more let's say, on a cloud approach. But in any case, this aspect of interaction of data is absolutely critical, I mean, and very important.
This is so important that this was the first request that we received from our first project in Italy, a shared catalog that we built with 8 university libraries in the south of Italy. And so also in this case, one of use cases is the opportunity to have a tool to share in the first step of the production is to share suggestion for correction, not to edit directly the heading without a correct authorization level, but to have a system to share suggestions so that also end users, and when we think about end users, we don't think also to students, but also to professors, to experts of the matter and so on, can give their contribution to the project. So can can send an information about, pay attention to, and you work, we handled 2 different entities, but this is the same person, this is the same work, this is the same subject in different languages and so on. So a collaborative and cooperative tools that will be in different steps or grades of authorization to arrive to the last level that will be the ability, if authorized, to change the heading and to correct, for example, the cluster and so on. This is already present in our use cases.
As a clarification along the same lines, so there, from what I understood from what you just expressed, there is an ability for institution specific levels of access, or let's say a specific vocabulary like the Getty thesaurus, or that won't be shared out back into the larger community, but can be imported and just using the same frameworks. Is that it? Just to clarify?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure I understood. Thank you.
Well, thank you. It is 11:30, and again, thank you for sharing this. So I'm hoping by the time we wrap up BIBFRAME Pilot Test 2 in June and get our assessment and continue to get feedback from external entities that are using BIBFRAME, we'll be ready to say that the library is moving forward in this brave new world. I was interested to hear the word pioneer someplace from one of you, which is one of the things we said to our implementers here, at least our testers here. So, again, on behalf of the Library of Congress, thank you so much for your time and your effort this morning and hard work that you've done.
Thank you.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.